His drinking habit was never an issue, until that particular day. At least, that's what I kept telling myself for a very long time. I told myself it was normal, that everyone unwinds somehow, that a drink after work didn't mean anything more than stress relief. I told myself love meant understanding, patience, and not making mountains out of things that hadn't yet turned into disasters. And for a while, that belief worked. It helped me sleep at night. It helped me avoid questions I wasn't ready to answer. When we met, he drank, but it wasn't alarming. A beer with friends, a few drinks at celebrations, the occasional night out that ended in laughter and stories the next morning. It felt social, controlled, harmless. He was functional, responsible, and present. His drinking didn't define him, and it certainly didn't define us. I never imagined that something so ordinary would one day feel like a shadow following our marriage everywhere we went. Marriage has a way of making patterns clearer. What once felt occasional slowly became predictable. Drinks after work turned into drinks before dinner. Weekends started revolving around alcohol subtly at first, then more obviously. Still, nothing felt urgent. There were no missed responsibilities, no violence, no public scenes. Just small changes I chose not to name. I didn't want to be dramatic. I didn't want to be the wife who nagged, who overanalyzed, who ruined peace by asking uncomfortable questions. I remember the first time I noticed how much I was adjusting myself around his drinking. I started choosing my words carefully when he had been drinking. I delayed serious conversations until mornings. I learned how to read his tone, his walk, the way he placed his keys on the table. I could tell how many drinks he'd had without asking. I didn't realize it then, but I was slowly becoming fluent in a language I never intended to learn. There were nights when he was softer after drinking, more talkative, more affectionate. Those moments confused me. They made it easier to justify everything else. I told myself alcohol made him open up, that it relaxed him, that maybe this was just how he coped. Love has a dangerous way of reframing red flags into quirks when you're not ready to confront the truth. Time passed, and drinking became part of our routine, like background noise. It didn't interrupt life. It blended into it. And because nothing catastrophic happened, I kept believing nothing ever would. I didn't realize how much danger there is in waiting for a disaster before you take something seriously. That particular day didn't start differently. That's the part that still haunts me. There was no warning, no intuition screaming at me to pay attention. The morning was normal. The air felt ordinary. If anything, I remember thinking how calm everything felt, how stable our life seemed. Looking back now, that normalcy feels cruel. He started drinking earlier than usual that day. I noticed, but I didn't comment. I had learned that pointing it out often led to defensiveness, denial, or jokes that dismissed my concern. I told myself it was a one-off, maybe a stressful day, maybe something he didn't want to talk about. I chose silence again, believing it was the safer option. As the hours passed, something felt off. Not dramatic, not explosive, just different. His words were slower. His reactions were delayed. He laughed at things that weren't funny and went quiet when conversation mattered. I remember feeling a knot form in my stomach, a quiet unease I tried to ignore. I had ignored it before, and nothing bad had happened. I thought this time would be no different. But that day didn't follow the rules I had grown used to. His drinking crossed a line I didn't know existed until it was already behind us. There was a moment, small but sharp, when I realized I didn't recognize the person sitting in front of me. His eyes looked distant, unfocused, like he was somewhere else entirely. And for the first time I felt unsafe, not physically, but emotionally, deeply, profoundly unsafe. Words were exchanged, not loud ones, not dramatic ones, but careless ones. The kind that slip out when inhibition disappears. He said things he had never said sober. Things that couldn't be laughed off or forgotten the next morning. I remember feeling like the ground shifted beneath me, like I had stepped into a version of our marriage I didn't know existed. I tried to ground the moment, to calm him down, to bring him back to himself. But alcohol doesn't listen to reason, and neither did he. It felt like talking to someone who looked like my husband but wasn't fully there. That realization hurt more than any argument ever could. What scared me most wasn't what happened, but how easily it happened. How thin the line was between manageable and unbearable. How quickly denial collapsed once reality decided to show itself. I remember thinking, if this is possible today, what does tomorrow look like? That day ended without a dramatic explosion. No police, no hospital, no public scene. And somehow that made it worse. Because there was no clear moment I could point to and say, this is where everything broke. Instead, there was just a quiet aftermath, a heavy silence filled with unspoken fear. The next morning, he didn't remember everything. Or maybe he did and chose not to say. He apologized vaguely, the kind of apology that acknowledges discomfort but avoids accountability. I accepted it, because that's what I had trained myself to do. But something inside me had shifted permanently. After that day, I started noticing everything. Every drink felt louder. Every evening felt uncertain. I found myself counting bottles, tracking time, bracing emotionally before conversations. Love started feeling like vigilance. And that's a heavy thing to carry quietly. I realized how much emotional labor I had been doing for years without realizing it. Managing moods, smoothing edges, protecting peace. Drinking had never been the issue, until it exposed how much of myself I had been shrinking to keep everything together. I wanted to believe that day was an exception. He wanted that too. Promises were made. Boundaries were discussed. For a while, things improved. But the fear didn't leave. Once you see a door open, you can't pretend it doesn't exist. I started imagining futures I had never considered before. Not dramatic ones, just questions. What if this gets worse? What if that day wasn't the peak, but the beginning? What if love isn't enough to compete with something that numbs pain so easily? I didn't leave. I didn't issue ultimatums. I stayed and watched, listened, waited. Some days felt hopeful. Others felt like I was holding my breath indefinitely. The uncertainty became part of our marriage, unspoken, but ever present. His drinking habit had never been an issue. Until that particular day. And even now I struggle to explain why that day mattered more than all the others. Nothing catastrophic happened, yet everything changed. Because that day showed me a version of our life I couldn't unsee. This story doesn't end with a dramatic resolution. It doesn't end with sobriety or separation or clear answers. It ends with awareness. With a quiet understanding that some lines, once crossed, leave echoes behind. We are still together. We still function. We still laugh sometimes. But something fragile broke that day. And no matter how much time passes, I carry the knowledge that love can survive many things, but trust, once shaken, never returns exactly the same. Some habits don't destroy relationships overnight. They wait. They blend in. They convince you everything is fine. Until one day, they remind you why people warn you in the first place. And you're left wondering whether you noticed too late, or whether noticing it all is already a kind of loss.